Hey, Dr. Kelly Starrett with the Ready State. Want to talk about a very common phenomenon in our athletic community, specifically in our bikers and our runners, and that is, what happened to my hips? My hips are on fire. My hip flexors are lit up. So when we say hip flexor, what exactly does that mean? So let's debunk that first. So theoretically, that's anything that flexes the hip. So are we talking about psoas, which runs next to the spine here and inserts on the leg? No, we're not. Specifically, we're talking about a couple big muscle groups where people are experiencing their discomfort around the front of the hip. And more importantly, we're really talking about typically the rectus femoris, which is the knee, the quadriceps that crosses the knee and goes up and inserts onto this lower spine of the pelvis here. So you've got this big bony one you usually can feel, and then a little below that, that's where your rectus femoris. So that rectus femoris crosses here. But then there's another big muscle that wraps around called the TFL, tensor fascia lata. And that tensor fascia lata is the muscle that sits just lateral to your rectus femoris, where you can kind of get a chunk of that thing. It attaches to your glutes and runs into your IT band and even arises on part of the pelvis here on this high part of the spine. So this is a system for sure. So when people are feeling cooked, typically, it is not necessarily the short hip rotators, but usually they're saying, oh, I'm feeling cooked on the front of the hip. So how do I manage this and how do I make myself feel better when I've already rung this bell, okay? Liver punch. All right, so first thing first, if you have access to a Marc Pro, one of the things that we like to do is to decongest. And just one of the things that happens when I use a Marc Pro is that I can sneak some messages into my brain that this muscle is contracting, I'm going to get more blood flow in that area, but also I'm going to tell my brain, hey, start to turn on those vasodilators, right? And hey, let go. You don't have to hold on trying to stabilize that hip or in that tonic position, because sometimes just overuse, because hey, I ran 12 miles in the mountains, is enough to light me up in some of this tissues, especially if I'm doing a lot of crazy work or work at end range. So pad placement around the hip sometimes feels a little bit like a mystery. So first of all, put one of the pads on your quadriceps, just down below, anywhere in the rectus femoris. Because really what we're trying to do is focus on some of the higher quad mass. Second is you can slip it right down inside your hips, and you can feel that there's a big chunk of muscle here, and this is where that rectus femoris is coming in. But even if you grab some of the TFL, that tensor fascia lata, that's okay in this hip system. You can think of like this is your biceps, right? That biceps is the rectus femoris, and the deltoid is like your TFL. So don't worry if you capture that. But if you come over into your groin and you feel a pulsing, that is your femoral triangle, and you have a nerve, artery, and vein there, that is not where to put the pad. So if you're going to drift out, error towards the lateral aspect of your groin, you do not need to work this femoral triangle. So if you push right over the pad and you're feeling a pulse there, that's not the right spot. Put that thing a little bit lateral, get some good contraction here. And remember, it doesn't have to be way, way up in the pelvis. We're trying to address this chunk of muscle right here. So if I get right inside and capture the insertion of that rectus femoris on this lower spine of the pelvis, I'm going to be good to go. Up top, I've got gracilis and this whole complex. But remember, it's never, ever just about a single muscle. It's about the neighborhood. So how do I tell the neighborhood, chill out? It's just a block party. We got a little rowdy, but the whole neighborhood needs to come together and clean up. And that leads us to our next piece, which can make a big difference. So check this out. I'll push this over. I'm going to show you a couple things to do to make your back feel better or make your hips feel better. First one is an easy hip reset. So just putting your feet up on the wall and then add some rotation. This is an easy way to get the hip to drop back in the socket. And if you don't believe me, talk to Pete Agoscu. This is for you, Pete. And getting your legs up is a fantastic restorative. You're taking the leg into this near position of emphasis, or this position of restriction where it's been lit up because you've been running or biking. And what this does is that it tells your brain, I can relax here, adding a little rotation, getting the weight of the femur to come back into the socket can do a lot to improve the mechanics of the hip. Sometimes that hip gets a little bit proud, and then that hip function gets a little bit off, and the rectus femoris is now trying to move the hip, stabilize the hip, and do a whole bunch, right? So putting your feet up for a few minutes and just wobbling back and forth until it stops feeling good. So what you'll see is that you get to this end range, you're like, oh, I'm so lit up. Hang out here. You can contract and relax, wiggle your legs back and forth. But this is a wonderful hip restorative position, especially when your hips are feeling cooked. Okay, so what we have is passive motion, proximation to the joint, and just a little bit of easy rotation, restoring how that moves. Because what you're going to see is when you're lit up here, you're not going to want to create rotation. So what we're doing is we're actively rotating. And if you put your hand in this area, you'll feel that muscle kind of lights up a little bit, right? So it's an easy and passive way to get a little bit of motion in so your brain goes, everything's cool here, bro. Everything's cool, honey bunny. Now check this out. The next thing is that you're going to get into a comfortable position. And what I want to do is I want to just get into a little bit of a flexed position. I'm going to put that ball right in this mass. So I have two areas that I'm going to target here. So I'm going to roll up on the side. And what I'm trying to imagine doing is building a pressure wave and peeling this thing off. So the goal here, again, is not to just be passive, but to tell my brain I got to own this position. So what I do is I build some isometrics here. I take a big breath in. I contract, and do you see how I flex that? That's telling that brain, hey, I've got to build tension here. It's a localized isometric. And then I slowly relax by exhaling and dropping down. And I'm going to stay there until it stops hurting or until it stops feeling like beef jerky. So I don't have to move anywhere. What I need to do is move around. So what I can do here is stay until I start to feel change in those tissues. But now, look what I've got. I can sneak in to this rectus femoris from the side. And I can add this little rotation, sneak into the quadriceps. And again, by freeing up this tissue, by getting it to relax, by getting more blood flow, by telling my brain it's not a problem, this is a wonderful way to break high tension because these tissues are overworked. It's not because they're weak. That may be the problem, but they're going to be weak in anyone who runs a half marathon in the mountains or rides a century. This is about, hey, I've overdone it. How do I make myself feel better? One, put those pads in a place where I can get some motion in this thing. Let that ride for an hour. Let it ride for 2 hours. Watch your favorite TV show, hang out. Second, some contract and relax, and then keep taking that over. So I just have to chase that around. And one of the things that we know is that if we go after some of the insertions of these muscles, especially rectus femoris, I can have a big impact on the entire tissue system. 3 simple things to make yourself feel better: pad placement, a little bit of leg rotation on the wall, a little targeted soft tissue. You'll be right as rain.